Marianne Hogan, hello. Welcome to the podcast. How are you?
Hi, thanks so much for having me. It's a real honor.
And you're just back home in Montreal
Yeah.
after an awesome tour of the European continent. How are you feeling? I guess we're almost exactly a week removed from your awesome second place finish at UTMB.
Yeah, I can't believe it's already been a week. Actually, I feel like it just flew by. It's weird. It's weird to be back to Canada too.
And how are you feeling physically and emotionally? One of the things I'm curious about is that your life must be materially different than it was 3 months ago. After landing on the podium of both Western states and UTMB, you've very, effectively made your mark on the sport in a very powerful way. I mean, how are you feeling, and how has life changed in the last 3 months?
I can't say that it's hit me yet. After Western States, people kept saying that to me, and I was like, I don't know that I don't know that I feel any different. I know that I'm really happy to be out there, and I was so happy to be out on the start line of UTMB, and just crossing the finish line was enough for me, and making it second is definitely more than enough for me. So I guess I'm still soaking it all in, and it feels good, but it hasn't really hit me yet.
Yeah. And I know physically you're not in tip-top shape, and you posted about how there was some damage incurred out on the UTMB course, but we'll get around to talking about that a little bit later. But Marianne, I recall your name coming into my consciousness just back in November of 2021, because I was helping out with the live stream of the Ultra Trail Cape Town. And I know you've been an athlete your whole life, just from doing a little bit of research about you. But aside from that, I just don't know that much about you, aside from you being from Canada and being on an absolute tear on the international racing circuit in the last, call it 12 months or so. So I'd love to just kind of do a little background. If you could tell us a little bit about yourself, your childhood, your history with sport and things like that.
Yeah, for sure. So I am the youngest of four kids, and we are 4 and 4 years. So we were raised as a family that, we weren't allowed to watch TV, and sports was really like something that we were to do, kind of to play outside and things like that. So that's kind of how I started my youth. And I started out really early as a swimmer, and then quickly transitioned as a triathlete, and did triathlon all through kind of like my high school years, all through my junior years. And I kind of developed as a young junior triathlete on the national team, going to world championships, and really enjoyed that scene for a little. But it was really a huge dream of mine to go study in the US, and to kind of go on the NCAA program, just because for us Canadians, they seem like it's such a big deal, and that's kind of what I wanted to do. So I decided to kind of apply to different schools. And so I applied to schools that were completely opposite to Quebec. So I applied to schools in like California, Hawaii, Florida, things like that, and ended up going to San Diego State University. I did my bachelor's and my master's degrees out there. So I ended up running 5 years of 10K around the track. And at the end of those 5 years, I was so sick and tired of being told that I had to run like 84-second laps and anything related to laps. So what I did is I actually had an extra year where I could work in the US. So I decided to move to Boulder, Colorado, which you know very well. No. And that's really where I discovered trail running. I discovered trail running a lot through the Rocky Mountain Runners group out in Boulder.
I didn't realize that. Ryan Silke's crew there in Boulder. They've built an institution of the Rocky Mountain Runners.
Yeah, well, I was a regular. I wouldn't miss any Monday night of Green Mountain that finished at the pub. So that's kind of how I fell in love with trail running. And then that's where my trail running career started.
That's fantastic. And I think so highly of them. And I've heard from so many people who live in Boulder now and who've been part of the trail running community there, that the Rocky Mountain Runners group has been so instrumental in really cultivating community in the Boulder area and connecting all the athletes in a place that is well known for being an outdoor and endurance sport mecca. But before we move on, I'd love to explore a little bit about like your siblings and stuff. Being the youngest of four that are all 4 years apart, it seems like that's really an interesting dynamic to grow up within. And maybe you being kind of the runt of the litter, youngest one. Has that shaped you in any way, both personally or athletically?
Yeah, I think in both ways. I'm definitely kind of the one that, so I'm the youngest, but I'm super close to my brothers and sister. And I was always the one that was trying to get them to go out and play. And they would always have me like go around in circle, like, oh, I'll play if this person plays and if this person plays. So I had to go out and convince everyone to go and play like a game of soccer outside or something like that. But it was also about, kind of joining them, and trying to, you develop earlier. I started skiing earlier just because I was the youngest, but they put me on skis anyways, because it was just easier to have me out there than to have to bring me to daycare or something like that. And it was always about trying to keep up with my brothers and trying to keep up with my sister. And I really do think that it shapes me as a person today, and it continues to shape me. My brother was actually the one doing my crew at UTMB. And he was also the one doing my crew at Western States. So, and my whole family was out there. So they are very much part of the person that I am today, and they continue to be for sure.
That must be so special to share those experiences with your siblings, especially those transcendental 100-mile life-changing days with your brother. I mean, I'm sure it creates amazing bond between you guys and amazing memories for him as well. So let's talk about triathlon a little bit too, because this is an interesting part of your story and your development. Of course, triathlon is a dynamic sport. You also have experience in track and field. And actually, this is just popping into my head too, but you being the youngest of four, I think Jakob Ingebrigtsen, the great track and field athlete, is also the youngest brother of, his family, who have all been great track and field athletes. And so there's maybe a connection there of just being kind of the youngest one and kind of benefiting from all the experience and maybe abuse from your siblings. But anyway, what I was going towards is, your experience with triathlon, because I'm curious, of course, like that being such a dynamic sport, how you feel it's maybe helped you in your development with trail running specifically. Anything that you carry over in training or in race execution that you sort of remember from those early days of triathlon?
Yeah, I think that triathlon is a very interesting sport, and it forces you to kind of be a kind of versatile athlete. I was, as a triathlete too, there was never one sport that I was dominant at. I was always, an okay swimmer, an okay biker, and an okay runner, which made me an overall good triathlete, which I think is kind of funny. And I do think that that's kind of me as a trail runner as well. Like I'm an okay, at Western States, I'm an okay on faster course, and I'm an okay at like more mountainous distances. If you ask me what my strength is, I couldn't really tell you. So I think that probably doing triathlon kind of shaped me as that person. But what I thought was interesting, and I was thinking during UTMB, was when we used to do triathlons, they also give you times on your transitions. And I was always competing with my brother on like who has the shortest transition time, like as if that was a race. And I was thinking about that during UTMB as too. It would be really interesting to kind of give like awards to the people who spend the less amount of time in the aid stations. And so I thought that was an interesting parallel as well.
Yeah. And as you get more experience in the sport, you find that, the more you can minimize that stoppage time, I mean, it ends up becoming critical, and especially in races like Western States and UTMB. So, in terms of your development as a trail runner specifically, of course, you just mentioned the Rocky Mountain Runners and the time that you spent in Boulder, but now you live back in Montreal in Quebec, which is probably not necessarily like a big trail and mountain running hub of the world. So I'm curious to hear you talk about that, about how you're able to compete at such a high level at these world-class races when you're not living in a place that is synonymous with having amazing trails to run.
Yeah, I think that, I mean, I'm someone who runs a lot. So I'm someone who will run frequently. So I'm not necessarily like one big run a day. Like I'm someone who likes to run like morning, lunch, dinner, kind of separate my day. It kind of allows me to to cut the work day, something like that. And so I do think that if I am to work a 9 to 5 job, it doesn't really matter where I am, because it's difficult otherwise to kind of go in the mountains, given the fact that I do have to be at work from 9 to 5 and something like that. So I manage it that way. And then what I do is on the weekends, I go everywhere. And so outside of Montreal, there are some pretty nice mountains. Of course, it's not the Alps and anything like that, but the White Mountains are reachable, Green Mountains in Vermont, in the Adirondacks, and then in Quebec proper, there's some pretty good mountains as well. So there is something to be said about being a weekend warrior and living in the city. And I think it is possible. I think it's just a matter of being committed to your sport and passionate about your sport mostly.
And I was going to ask about that, because it seems like there is kind of a good group of committed and passionate trail runners in Montreal. Can you talk about that community a bit?
Yeah, there's a huge group of people who love trail running in Montreal and in Quebec, and it's really nice. And I touch base about the places that are around Montreal, but in the middle of Montreal, there's a mountain. It's called Montrael, and it's not at all a mountain per se, but it does has trails. And there's a lot of people who are just so enthusiastic about running. And as often as I can, I go running with these different clubs. There's a lot of clubs in Montreal. A lot of social runs that go through that go through the mountain, but also that will run through the parks and different places in Montreal, which is really, really fun. Montreal is actually a great running community. And I know that when you do the live, there's a lot of people from Quebec that follow along, and they're super enthusiastic. And that's
there's so many Canadian flag emojis in the chat.
I know, which is really nice. Like, it's nice to be part of a community that really cares and really supports you. And whenever you go running, they're just so enthusiastic about what you do. And it's really something that you feel throughout the running community here in Montreal, is that they're very proud and they're very happy about about what you do and just being part of the community as a whole.
Yeah, it must make you very proud to represent that community on the international stage. So stepping back in time a little bit, it looked like your first ultramarathon was back in 2015 at the Silver Rush 50 in Leadville. It was actually my first ultramarathon also in 2010. Nice. Always a formative experience, those first marathons. But then it looks like, and I've heard you speak about a couple of times in I Run Far interviews about a serious injury that you incurred in 2017 or so. So maybe talk about that. What was that injury and what was that hiatus like for you as somebody who had been an athlete your whole life?
Yeah, so what happened was I had a good couple of years there running trails, loving it. And then in 2018, I went out running with my brother, and I was out on the trails just on a very easy section, and my right ankle twisted, and it got stuck in a root, and my body went flying forward, and I just spiral fractured my tibia and fibula. I knew immediately that it was broken. My foot was completely out of whack, and so that actually put a huge damper in my running days. It was really interesting because when I got out of the woods that day, I called my doctor, and my doctor straight up said, like, "Hey, Marianne, this is because I got an x-ray and everything, and it was confirmed that it was a spiral fracture." And he told me, "This is actually going to be a difficult one to recover. It's going to take you at least 6 months before you start being able to consider trying to run again." And I thought to myself, like, that can't be true. Like, a bone, they only take 6 weeks to heal. Yeah. But spiral fractures are very tricky. And it took at least 6 months for me to even like walk without a limp. And I still had all the hardware in my leg. So it was really difficult for me to run. And for some reason, my body wasn't reacting well to the hardware that was put in my body, because I could feel it with every step. So when I was able to run again, I started running, but it was very much with the limp. Like, you couldn't really, I was nowhere close to being the same person that I was. I ran for about so I toughed it out for a whole year. And then I requested to get the hardware removed. And when I did that, that's when I was able to kind of finally come back. But that was a whole entire second surgery. And 2 surgeries in my leg actually really severely damaged it. My right leg is still to this day very small. And it definitely has it is part of the reason why I struggle at the end of UTMB with my left leg because I just overcompensate. My right calf is like tiny in comparison to my left, and same goes with my right thigh. So it was an injury that, it happened for a split second, but cost me about 2 years of my running career.
But it was almost like 4 years. I mean, if you look at your results, you didn't race between 2017 and 2021, at least from what I can tell on the major internet databases of race results.
Yeah, so I had a big year in 2017 when I started running again in 2018, and I was about to start that season is when I got seriously injured. So 2018 up until 2020, basically 2 years. But I also during that time, so I wasn't able to run at all, but I really wanted to focus on something just because I needed to kind of focus on a goal or something like that. So I started working as a Paralympic guide in triathlon. And so that took a lot of my time. And what happened was I had committed to being a guide up until 2020, but then because of COVID, 2020 became 2021. And so I can't do both at the same time. I can't really be a guide and a trail runner just because the scheduling is just so intense. And so I kind of pushed back again my trail running days for a year later, up until that's why I came out in Cape Town in November, because it was so far out in the season. And I had done my triathlon Paralympic. So Tokyo happened in August 2021. And that's when I was able to get to trail running again. And that's kind of how that happened.
I really wanted to ask you about the Paralympic guiding, because I think it's a really touching part of your story. And I didn't realize that it was connected to this period of injury. So maybe dig into that a little bit more. Was it in that darkness and sadness of injury where you were looking for a way to stay connected with sport? And did you find that in the guiding? And maybe in answering that question, explain a little bit more about what you were doing with the Paralympic team.
Yeah, so it was definitely kind of to keep me occupied during those times, and also keep me focused and working towards something, because that's really something that I enjoy. And it kind of just fell on me. What happened is when I was a junior triathlete and I went to Worlds, there was an elite woman at the time who is now the head coach for the Canadian Paralympic team. And to be a guide, you're not allowed to race for yourself on the triathlon circuit, but you have to have a specific experience working with triathlon. And so the pool of candidates in Canada is not that big. And so I think what they did is they were probably going down the list of like junior triathletes who had gone to Worlds and who had done national teams, but who were no longer racing, but still in shape, because you still have to be, because you do the full triathlon, and on the tandem, you're at the front of the tandem. So it's very important that you're very strong on the bike. So they contacted me, I think in April of 2019. And they sent me out to Victoria, British Columbia for a time trial test on the tandem. And to see if I was going to be, if I was connecting with Jessica, who is the athlete I was paired up with. And then things went really well. And I think a week later we were out, we were leaving for Hawaii for a training camp and going straight to Yokohama in Japan for our first World Cup. So it was a quick turnover, and it was quite the experience. Ever since then, we traveled the world together, and it was an experience like no other, because it was a very human experience, and it really, it showed me so much about the world. It's very interesting to be connected to someone who cannot see. It seems like a very basic statement, but it's crazy to experience it from so close. Because I'm her guide in the race, but I'm also her guide in life. When we go, when you go on an international scene, I'm guiding her through everything. And it was just a very eye-opening experience, to say the least. And I'm so happy that I did it. Like it really helped me evolve as a person on so many levels, and communication being one of them. It's crazy how much you think that the people understand what you mean, but when the person is blind and my athlete is also half deaf, you really have to weigh in every single word that you say, and it has to mean exactly what it says. And so there's just a lot of things to consider when working with someone like Jessica, and it was a very nice experience.
Talk a little bit more about your and Jessica's relationship. In what ways has she inspired you to the successes that you've achieved in your career?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of crazy. So Jessica, she had a career as a swimmer. So back when she was like, I think 16 to 18, she won some Paralympic medals in swimming, and then went off for like 10 years and didn't do anything, and then decided that she wanted to start doing triathlons. And so came back and started a whole new career as a Paralympic athlete, and started doing triathlon. And it, it's just crazy to me, all the things that you are able to do even if you have these things going on, like injuries. And I think that that's something that we can all relate to is, you have something going on, but you're able to overcome it and still go forward and still do things. So I do think that Jessica really opened up my eyes to that. But she is also a wonderful human being who is always happy. She's just always having a good time, and she's always smiling. And there's something to be said about going to the beach and having her comment on the smells and the sounds. And like, it was interesting once because we were discussing, like, so we're traveling the world, right? And it's interesting because to me, it's very hard to understand, like, as a blind person, how can you enjoy the fact that you're in Australia versus the fact that you're in Norway, for example? Like, how do you differentiate where you find yourself in the world if you can't really tell where you are? And you're so dependent on other people. And so there's just all these dimensions that you don't really find yourself asking about, if you're not in that situation. But now that I've asked myself these questions and I'm aware of them, like, I feel like I'm so much more aware of the little things in life, and just, grateful for life in general.
Yeah. Beautiful. Well, I think it's just such a interesting and impactful part of your story and I'm sure it's a two-way street. Like Jessica, you guide her in a lot of ways and you contribute to her athletic success. But I'm sure when you're out there suffering at UTMB, you're remembering all the miles that you guys have shared together and probably drawing some inspiration from her as well. So
Yeah, for sure.
Let's talk a little bit about your return from injury into this incredible run of success that you've been on recently. Like I said, I was doing the live stream at Ultratrail Cape Town back in November of last year, where you finished second behind Courtney Dauwalter in a fantastic podium performance. Then you came back down to the US, down to Texas, and won the Bandera 100K, punched your golden ticket to Western States, where you finished third place. And now you finished second at UTMB. So you came back from injury and have just been on an absolute roll. I'm wondering, before we sort of talk about those races, maybe to what you attribute to this incredible consistent run of success. Like, do you feel that maybe in that time of injury, you were able to reset and develop more energy and motivation? Or is there anything else that you can point to that you think has really contributed to this incredible run of consistency?
Well, I don't want to say that. I mean, I don't want to claim that I'm the most excited person on the start line, but I think that it would be difficult not to, it would be difficult to be more excited than I am, to be honest. And that just goes because, it had been 4 years that I was on the sideline, cheering people on, being on people's crews, being there, being a volunteer, partaking in the trail running community, but never being able to take part of a race. And for multiple reasons. At first it was my injury, but then it was also the fact that I had committed to my work with Jess as a Paralympic. So I feel like ever since my door has opened back into trail running, I'm just so excited, and I want to make sure that I use up every single opportunity that I have to go out there and run as fast and as best as I can. And to a certain degree, it doesn't really matter to me how fast I run. It's just a matter of making it to the start line and making it to the finish if I can. And I'm not saying that I'm all about finish at every cost. But to me, it's just, that's what I want. And I want to make sure that I get it done because I know that it will make me happy. And usually it does. So I think that my consistency is just the fact that every single time I've shown up on the start line, I've been so enthusiastic to be there that I'm willing to. And when I get to a dark place, like I can't really call it a dark place because it's just like I'm expecting it and it's part of the process. And I've chosen to be there and I've waited so long to be there that I just have to push through it because I've asked for it,
Yeah. So it's a psychological thing that has made you so consistent. Was there any, I'm curious, since you mentioned that you never really lost touch with the community, that you were out volunteering and crewing for people. Did you ever kind of lose hope that you were going to be able to come back and compete at such a high level again? Or did you always have that belief when you were suffering through that multiple year injury?
No, I've never lost hope. I don't know if it was at the time. I didn't know if it was misplaced hope, but I had never lost it. It was always like, I just have to be patient and understand that, someday I'll be able to be out there as well. And I just held on to it, and I was surrounded by good people who cared about me and who kept including me regardless of if I was racing or not, and regardless of if I was doing well or not. And that means the world to me. And I think that that's why too, like, community is hugely important for me, and will always be. And it's probably one of the biggest reasons why I'm in the sport in the first place.
Yeah. So let's talk about your training a little bit. I guess we sort of touched on this with your answer about being a triathlete in your earlier life, but you live in Eastern Canada, and I imagine the winters are harsh. You don't live near the big mountains to simulate something like UTMB. How would you characterize your training? And, aside from being a weekend warrior who can bounce to the White Mountains and the Green Mountains and to the Adirondacks and stuff, are there any other words of advice that you would give to people who live in sort of flatter, non-mountainous regions to be successful in the mountainous races?
Yeah, I think there's a lot to be said. I think sometimes we worry too much about, like, if we have to do vert, then we have to do at least like 1,000-meter vert for it to be worth it. But I think that just the little things, they add up. And I always suggest to people, like, if you can get out and do like 30 minutes of stair work, or even just 15 minutes, like, it's better to do that than nothing at all. And so the little things really do add up. And if you're in a city environment or something like that, you can also, what I do usually when I'm in the city, I don't necessarily like to make training annoying in a certain way. I try to make it as fun as possible. So I'll just go running like just a run that's more like a touristy run or something throughout the city. And then I come back home and I do specific like weight exercises that kind of simulate the fact that I would be going up a mountain. So then I'm having fun in the process, and it's not just about, going up and down a flight of stairs just to say that you're doing vert. So yeah, I think that if you're not in an environment that you're able to completely incorporate trail running or anything like that, I think that weight room is your best friend. Just make sure that you're going regularly and doing exercises that are pertinent to the races that you're preparing to.
Be more specific about that. How would you recommend people approach their lifting of heavy objects to be better in the mountains?
I don't even do lifting of heavy objects. I just focus on working on my legs, like as much squats or lunges or things like that. I think that that's sufficient. And as I feel like, as long as I feel like my legs are strong, then in the mountain setting, I feel confident, and I feel confident to go hard downhill because I know that I worked my quads to be prepared for it. But
yeah, good advice. So do you have a coach? I'm curious because you mentioned earlier that you sometimes will do 2 or 3 runs a day. It sounds like you take a somewhat casual approach to your training, but obviously you're serious about it. You do the little things like get in the weight room. Tell us about sort of how you structure things, and maybe you could use this specific example of, your build up to Western States this year.
Yeah, of course. So no, I do not have a coach. For me, it's very important that I keep a dimension of fun. And I considered multiple times working with the coach, just because I do think that sometimes it would be good for me. But my biggest fear is that I would ever be in a position to say no to someone. Like, if someone offers a fun weekend activity or like a fun weekend loop and you really want to do it, but that's not on your program, like I don't think I'm willing to do that just yet. I'd rather put forward like the adventures versus a specific training. So that's my reason for it. But that being said, I don't think that I'm still open to consider it. It's just not my situation right now. And the way that I structure my training. So back in the day, I used to to get a lot of injuries, overuse injuries. I've had quite a few, so I have had stress fractures, and I've noticed that over a certain mileage is where I am most prone for them. So I am usually very careful at making sure that I'm below a certain threshold, and that's all I usually worry about during a given week. So, for example, I take a look at my weekly mileage, and I make sure that by Sunday night, I'm not like way over that weekly mileage. And to be honest, sometimes it'll happen, but it's just a matter of keeping an eye on it and making sure that I'm not overdoing it and taking care of my body, because that's my biggest pitfall in a certain way is I overdo it and then I get injured. And yeah. Mm-hmm.
So what do you think? I mean, because clearly if I'm looking at your race results over time, there was that hiatus due to injury, but in the last 12 months, like you've really moved up a step. You've definitely established yourself as being one of the world's best in the highest echelon of athletes in the sport. Is there anything in your training or anything in your lifestyle that you've changed that you think has contributed to this sort of jump up in performance that you've experienced in the last 12 months? Or is it just simply the fact that you do have that sense of gratitude emerging from the injury and maybe having a little bit of extra energy and motivation in its aftermath that has led to this awesome run of success?
Yeah, I think gratitude for sure is number one, but I think number two is because I'm so grateful for it, I make it my priority. So, the leading up to Western States, that wasn't perfect at all as well. I actually dislocated a bone in my left heel like 2 months before Western States, or it was in March. So that actually cost me a lot of my preparation. But what I try to do is always make it a priority. And what I did for both Western States and UTMB is I went in California ahead of time. I made sure to really kind of immerse myself with the environment, and I was focused on the race without it stressing me. Like, it was just about, like, the whole month of June for me was about Western States, and that's just what I was going to be doing, and that's what I was going to be focusing on. So I do think that makes a difference, and that's not something that I had done in the past. But I had also never raced Western States before, so I think that I don't know if that's a difference, but I do think that it helped for sure. And I did the same for UTMB. So the whole month of August, I was out in Chamonix, running up those mountains or walking up those mountains, and getting used to the environment, getting used to working with poles, getting used to the altitude. And I do think that did help me prepare for those two big events.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the specificity.
Mm-hmm.
So you were the first athlete to podium at both Western States and UTMB in the same summer since Mr. Kilian Jornet did it back in 2011. And it's an incredible accomplishment. I mean, anytime you're in the conversation with Kilian Jornet is a good, good accomplishment or a good conversation to be a part of. So obviously I want to talk a lot about UTMB, but maybe let's meditate on Western States a little bit before we get to it. You seem to have a really solid race there. And I know that you said in your post UTMB interview with Iron Far that Western States was your main focus for the season. Mm-hmm. UTMB was sort of taking sort of a secondary role in terms of how you were prioritizing your goals. What were your main takeaways from that fantastic third place at Western States?
Well, Western States is my first 100-mile, right? So I think I have a lot of takeaways to take away from it.
Wait, okay. I mean, I should have known this, but so that was, you've run 200 milers in your life and you podiumed at Western States and UTMB. That's crazy, Marianne. Awesome. Yeah. Keep going. I'm sorry to interrupt.
No, that's okay. I laugh just because, so Western States, and I'm incredibly grateful for my third place finish, and I'm happy for it and everything, but it was just, to me, it was just not at all a good race. Like, I got so sick. I was so sick between like kilometer 30 up until kilometer 75. I was throwing up like I've never thrown up in my life, like not even outside of running. So what it really showed me is that, it's 100 mile, and 100 miles is a really long time. And you can be going, no matter what happens at kilometer 30, is definitely not what's going on at kilometer 120 of the race. And that's just something that I really wanted to bring forward through UTMB, is just not panic when things aren't going well and just keep moving forward. Because if you're moving forward, you're progressing. And if you're progressing, then you're getting closer to the finish line. And that's really all that you can do. And you can't expect to be running fast the whole time. I think that was the biggest change for me mentally. Because, coming off from like running Bandera, for example, which Bandera was like the most perfect race I've ever had, in the sense of like, I've never had a down moment. It was, good pace the whole time, nutrition, hydration, everything was perfect. Whereas Western States was all over the place, left and right. Like my mental game was just like, I have no idea how I don't even know how I made it to the finish line, to be honest. I was so dehydrated in the next day. It was crazy.
Talk about that a little bit. I'm curious because now from memory, I think you came into Duncan Canyon like in the lead or with the leaders, and then you've kind of faded until sort of the middle of the top 10 and then ran your way back onto the podium. How did that all play out?
So what happened is, when you come into Duncan, like at the top of the hill before Duncan Canyon, I was maybe like in 6th or 7th or something, but there's a big downhill, and that downhill is very runnable. And I love downhills. Like, I just really enjoy them. So I just decided to go for it. And I ran my way to first place, but I didn't know that that's where the aid station was, Duncan Canyon. And then I show up first at the aid station. But then it was always my strategy to go easy on the uphill, because I had some pain on my left side. And going uphill is where it was hurting. But it was when I got out of Duncan Canyon that I started feeling very, very sick, and then making my way out of Duncan Canyon and then Robinson Flat. And then that whole other downhill section, I was barely able to run, and I was very panicking. Well, I was just kind of like disappointed, because in my head and, through Western States Memorial Camp, I was just telling to myself, like, man, this part, like, you can bomb this part, and then I was running through it, and I was just like basically jogging, like barely able to move. Like, I was just, and then that's where I kind of started getting in my head, like, man, I'm having the worst race of my life. Like, this isn't going well. Like, but I'm still moving. And then I started throwing up. And then I was just thinking like, oh, like it's weird, because like, I was just thinking at that point, I was like, all I have to do is make it to the finish, and that's all I have to do. And then eventually the stomach issues started going away, and then I started having energy again, and then I started feeling great. And that's when I started picking up people again. So that's kind of how I lived my Western States. But it's just weird, because in my head, it was not good. Like, it was not a good race. I was not feeling well. I was sick for most of it, but then the result is great. So I was just like, okay, well, I'll take it. But it was weird.
Interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
Sometimes you don't have to feel good to perform well. So yeah, I mean, maybe you could talk about the competitive dynamic a little bit, because you guys were really close. I recall doing the finish line interview, and we had 3 of you on the track at the same time doing the finish line interviews. I can't remember, was it Elsa McDonald, yourself, and Lucia Bueller? I think we're all sitting in the chairs at the same time.
It was Lucia and Emily.
And Emily Hogan, right?
Yeah,
that's what it was.
Emily Hogan, yeah.
So maybe talk about that, the competitive dynamic in the women's field that day at Western States, and how you were able to then rally to ultimately finish on the podium.
So it's very interesting, because that's kind of what got me out of my negative state, because what was going on is I felt horrible, but I never really got past. Like, I got past at the beginning when I started feeling sick, but then even when I threw up, like all through that section, I never got passed by anyone. So I was thinking like, like, this is interesting. I must still be top 10, but I didn't really know where I was. And then eventually when I started fueling again, that's when I started catching up to people, and people who had passed me a really long time ago that I thought were long gone, like in my head, they were almost at the finish. So it's very interesting. And that's what I love about 100 miles, is that it's not over till it's over, and you just have to keep pushing. But there were so many of the girls, like, I feel like they were just popping out of everywhere, like when I left Forest Hill, going down into that next section, there is like, we pass, I think we like, so my pacer, he kept saying that we needed to play Pac-Man. Yeah. So we were looking for women ahead, and it was almost like, oh, there's one. Yes. And it was like, oh, you got to go. So it was just kind of like a game, and we had a good time. But it's very interesting because like the women at Western States, like I feel like that's the most like sportsmanship I've ever seen in any type of situation, like Western States specifically. And I don't know why exactly. I do think that it's the pillars of the sport, like Casey and Magda, who really set that years back. But I love how it keeps going forward. And like, even though we're passing each other, we have so much respect for one another that it's kind of weird, like it's a competitive situation, but we're like, hey, like, good job, keep pushing, but I'm going to go ahead now. So yeah, it's just interesting.
Beautiful. Yeah. And now Casey and Magda pass the torch to your generation. It's up to you to make sure that gets passed down to the next generation too.
Yeah.
So fantastic. And it was so cool to see you race through. And yeah, it's funny. I can point to a few races in my career too, where the low points come really early and you think like, oh, I'm screwed. And then you're able to rally at the end and come out of it with an awesome, result to show for it. So moving on, the story of last summer, at least to me, was the difficulty or near impossibility of pulling off the Western States UTMB double. And we just mentioned that you and Kilian are really the only people to finish on the podium of those two races in the same summer in the last decade plus. So, of course, we need to learn from you as to how to pull this off. All the professionals in the international ranks, I'm sure, are eager to get your advice. So, after Western States this year, of course, you said that it wasn't a perfect race, but you're still able to finish on the podium. How did the recovery, what was your approach to the recovery after Western States with the understanding that you were hoping to stand on the start line at UTMB only 2 months later?
Yeah, I made sure to like completely cut off running for like 1 week. Like I got myself in an environment that has nothing to do with running. I went to visit a friend in Seattle, kind of just had a good time. And that was really important for me. And I think it really helped me recover and mentally recharge as well. And then I had told myself that I was going to take like 2 weeks off of running, but then I don't know. I feel like it's easy to, once again, I came back to Montreal and it was really easy to join community runs. And I was just like, oh, I'll just go see how I feel. So I took like a week to kind of get back and just kind of jogging a little bit. And then I had 4 weeks to build because I had 8 weeks between the 200 miles. So what I figured is I'd do 2 weeks off, 4 weeks build, and 2 weeks kind of like tapering for UTMB. So I kind of started again on my third week. That weekend, I did the huge weekend. And it was really funny because when I started running that weekend, the morning of, I went running with like 6 of my guy friends, and we started going up a hill, and my body immediately, like, my face was so red, like it was red, and my heart rate was going off charts, and I was breathing like crazy. Like everyone was looking at me like, okay, like we were doing the presidential traverse like out and back, but it was on the first hill, like it really looked like I was gonna die. And so it's really interesting because I was thinking like my body is probably in shock and kind of telling my brain like, tell her we're not doing this again, like we're not going to do this. Yeah. But I pushed through it, and eventually my body kind of like regained my, I don't know, it came back to my regular zone, and I was able to do it. And so that really started kind of like my build up towards UTMB. And my sole focus during those 4 weeks was getting as much vert as possible, as often as possible. But I was doing the full month of July in Montreal, so I didn't really have access to a lot of vert in July. But then I went to Chamonix for the month of August, and that's really where I focused on incorporating as much vert as possible. And I do think that helped me transition for sure.
Cool. Yeah. So I want to talk about that a little bit more too, because obviously I just want to, I don't know if you're on Strava. I need to look this up, but the specifics, okay, I need to look this up. I should have done this before our conversation, but the specifics are, I think, fascinating or interesting for the listeners, right? Because the you arrive in Chamonix and you have this depth of strength and fitness from Western states, right? So you said that the emphasis then turns to vertical. So you're probably doing a lot of climbing, a lot of hiking, a lot of, steeper descending. Are you also thinking about your overall volume, or do you feel like you've already checked that box because you've just completed a 100-mile race? What's the balance between volume, intensity, and vertical?
I've already checked that box, so I'm not thinking about volume. But when you try to get as much vert as possible, volume also comes along with it. I think I had my biggest volume week 3 weeks before UTMB, and it was volume heavy and elevation gain heavy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And how were you feeling? Like, were you standing on the start line of UTMB feeling fit and fresh and confident, or were you still feeling a little bit banged up and fatigued from Western states? Because, I'm curious about this because I've raced these big races myself throughout my career, and I always need like deep physical, emotional, spiritual recovery afterwards. And so I'm just curious about like your confidence versus insecurity, or fatigue versus freshness at the start line of UTMB.
So I'll answer this question two parts. I was feeling very confident in myself. I was feeling great. I was feeling fit, and I was feeling ready to roll. But I had never really raced in Europe. I had never really raced in those big mountains, and I had no idea how I was going to turn out in comparison to like the European athletes who, everyone listed for, on the I-1 like definitely that Canadian was at the bottom of the list, or like, it's so I was feeling great, but I didn't know how I would compare, or how my physical abilities would compare to the others. And that's what I was curious about. But to me, what was important is that I was feeling good and I was going to race at the best of my abilities. And if my body, a lot of people asked me before the race if I had recovered from Western states. And I said, well, at this point, I can tell you yes, but at the middle of the race, maybe my answer will be different. And I don't know how it's going to turn out, but yeah. I'm willing to go find out,
Amazing. And you did find out, and with an incredible result to show for it. And I'm still dumbfounded at the fact that you've run 200-mile races and you've been on the podium of Western states. It's a great start. And probably the challenge for you now is to maintain a sense of humility that it's not always going to be that easy or that successful. But
I definitely don't think that it will be that easy or that successful. And I mean, there's definitely first luck,
beginner's luck.
Yeah. Beginner's luck, exactly. And I'm okay with that.
Yeah. Well, it's the attitude that I think probably has contributed to that, great start for you, of just having that sense of like, I'm happy to be here. Let's go give it a good effort, and the result will be what it is. And hopefully you can maintain that attitude and not put too much pressure on yourself. And especially now that, like I said, I feel like your life is probably materially changed after this summer. And now you're going to go into every single race that you do, whether it's here in North America or in Europe or anywhere else internationally. And Marianne Hogan's name is going to be listed among the contenders. And so it is going to be difficult, I think, for you to, have the same psychology, but that's a good problem to have, so to speak. So let's talk about UTMB. Obviously, Katie Scheid went off the front at a fairly aggressive pace, and we'll sort of get into how everything played out. But maybe let's just start by talking about how you were thinking about the race strategically and how it played out in the early miles for you. Maybe take us through Lake Contamine or so.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I always tell myself that I want to go progressive in these runs. But it was really funny because my friend Mathieu was at the start line, and he insisted that I stand next to him, because he's like, there's never any girls on the start line of UTMB. Like, you should be standing on the front line. So I ended up starting with him, and obviously ended up starting off pretty quickly. When I got passed by Jim Wamsley at like kilometer 3 or 4, I got pretty nervous. I was like, darn it, did I just mess this up for myself? But no, I mean, I was having a great time, and I wasn't pushing that hard, but I was just trying to, make the most of it. And I honestly had a great time, like through UTMB. Like, you go through those cities, like going through Les Houches. There are so many people there cheering, and everyone is either yelling your name because they see it on your bib or because the announcer called it. I don't know, but everyone seems to know who you are, and they're yelling your name, and there's so much enthusiasm. Same goes for Saint-Gervais. I go through Saint-Gervais and I'm feeling great, and I'm having the best of times, and I'm like feeling like this is the race of a lifetime. And then I keep going. I'm going towards Les Contamines. And then that's when I started having stomach issues again for some reason. I started feeling very sick. I have to stop to go to the bathroom 3 times before Les Contamines. And I'm thinking like, not again. Like, what is going on?
Yeah.
But I don't really let it affect me. I get to Les Contamines. I know that I'm behind Katie. Everyone keeps telling me. And it's funny because the people who are giving me splits, so everyone was telling me that I was second female, but the people who were giving me splits, they were telling me, but they were also saying like, she's starting off really fast. Like, don't judge your pace based on her, because they were telling me that she was going out fast.
Yeah.
Which in my head, I always thought it was funny because I was like, I'm just running here. I don't know how far Katie is anyways. But yeah. So I go to Les Contamines, and then going up Le Col du Bonhomme, I'm still having stomach issues, but it starts leaving me when I get to Les Chapieux. That's when I finally start feeling better. And then I start going up. What's the next one? It's Grand Col de la Seigne.
Col de la Seigne, yeah.
Yeah. So I go up Grand Col de la Seigne. I'm feeling great, and at that point, I'm still second. I'm still kind of in disbelief that I'm in second, and I'm going up, and I'm feeling good. So I just take my little pace, and I'm going about my way. And then I make it on the other side, and then I see Greg Valet, who's there, and he gives me a split, and he says, "Hey, you took on time. You're now taking time on Katie."
Yeah. Okay.
So from Les Chapieux to is where I started taking time. So he says, just keep moving at a good pace, and you're going to slowly pick back up on her. So then I'm like,
There's still a lot of race to go at that point.
Yeah, I know. So I was just like, interesting, but I'm feeling good. So I'm going to keep pushing at the pace that I'm going. And so I make it to Courmayeur. And again, I had taken some time on her. And that's where I did a very quick aid station stop.
Yes. So let me pause you there, because I was doing the commentary here in my basement watching you guys.
Nice.
Because Katie took I think it was 8 or 9 minutes at the aid station, and you were there for 2 or 3. And so I recall in my own sort of analysis saying, okay, well, Marianne has taken 6 minutes just in this aid station transition. It goes back to what you said earlier about your triathlon days.
Yeah.
You minimize that. But Katie still had a fairly comfortable lead of, 20 minutes or so. So then it seemed like out of Courmayeur, Katie started to struggle a little bit. You start making up massive time on her, and then ultimately make the pass somewhere around the Grand Col Ferret. So please paint the picture. I want all the details of what happened as you saw Katie, knew that you were making the approach, and then what happened when you made the pass. Because I mean, that's a big thing, Marianne. I don't know if you really appreciate it, but coming into the lead of the UTMB in the second half of the race is a pretty big accomplishment in life, just being in the lead at UTMB. Yeah. So I want you to give us all the details of how that played out.
Yeah. So, I mean, coming out of Courmayeur, you have one steep hill, but then you're running kind of on the, what they like to call a terrace. It's just kind of goes up and down. And historically, that's more my strength than anything else in the course. So in my head, I was just okay, this is a good place for me to have some fun here. So I just start running. I'm running up and down those hills, and I start kind of pushing up the pace, and I start picking up the guys one by one. And I just move forward like that. And when I make it to Arnouvaz, the people at the aid station, they tell me hey, Katie was just sick and she's 2 minutes ahead of you. So I'm like, oh, okay, this is nice. This is interesting. And so I take off. I take it off really easy, and I go up Grand Col Ferret, and I see Katie, she's 2 minutes ahead, and we're going up a hill. So I can see her this whole time. But I'm thinking there's absolutely I'm in no rush. I don't need to pass Katie at all going uphill. I'm just kind of going up. So I'm going, and I catch up to her at the very top. But mind, Katie at this point, and I told her this after the race, and I didn't want to tell her during because I didn't want to frighten her, but she was so white. She was white like my t-shirt. She was frighteningly white. And she was wearing a full buff, a hat, gloves, a jacket, and I was just in a t-shirt.
Really?
And it was really interesting, the contrast. So I make it up. I go up all the way to her, and I was thinking like, oh, I'll just catch up to her and then kind of just relax here for a little. Because I love downhill. So then we make it to the top, and then I put my poles away, and that's when I'm like, okay, well, I'm gonna have some fun here. Yeah. And then I start going downhill, and I just passed her, and it wasn't like it wasn't at all tactical. It wasn't like, it was just like, this seems to me like a good spot, and I'm feeling great, and I'm just gonna go for it. So I went for it, and it was pretty fun.
So did she try to stick with you there when you made the pass, and maybe also talk about the psychology of that? Like, did you feel the weight of, I'm Marianne Hogan, the proud Montreal Canadian, and I'm now in the lead of the UTMB at over 100 kilometers into the race? Like, it's a pretty important part of the race where you took the lead too.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know. I feel like I passed her, and all I said was like, let's go, Katie, you're crushing it. And she responded like, you too. But there was no assessment that she was coming with me, because like she was going at it, because when I caught up to her at the top, I took the time at the top to kind of like slow down, put my poles away, and get myself in descending mode. Whereas she got to the top, kept going, and she was all dressed still, and she had her poles in her hands when I passed her. Yeah. Like they were all open. And when I passed her, there was no I didn't think she was gonna fall. I don't think she was gonna follow, and she was still very white, So, and I had she had seen me the whole hike up, like catching up to her and kind of just like staying there. So, but it was really funny, and we'll get to it. But then she did the exact same in reverse to me. So it's hilarious.
Yeah, let's get to it. But tell me about the psychology there. I mean, were you like, there's two types of people in the sport. I feel like, at least myself, I probably would have panicked and like totally, freaked myself out to be in the lead of the UTMB. And there's others who thrive with that.
No, I was thriving. I was just like, yeah, I don't know. I passed, and I was having such a good time. Like in my head, all I was thinking was like, woo! Like, that's all I was going on. Like I was just having a good time, and I was just going down the hill like it was a Saturday run with my friends, like having a good time pushing the downhill. And then I started seeing, when I got to, then on the downhill, I saw some people that I knew, and they were super excited, and that kind of like brought my stoke level up. And then I went to La Folie, and my whole family was there, and then I got super excited. And then
oh, that must have been so cool.
Yeah, my whole family was there in La Folie, so that was really cool. And I was like, when I feel good and I'm in the race, like I'm not like, you can talk to me and I'm just laughing and I'm having a great time. It's not like I'm focused or anything. It's very like we're having a conversation here,
That's how all the great athletes seem to be in our sport. The world-class ones can manage to carry on conversations and crack jokes even when they're suffering mightily 120 kilometers into the race. So ultimately, you had some physical problems, though, at UTMB. In your post-race I Run Far interview, you referred to them as mechanical issues. Going back to your triathlon vocabulary. Yeah. And since the race, you posted on Instagram that you tore your psoas. So tell us what happened in the race, and how the problem manifested physically.
Yeah. It was really funny because before I figured out what I had, I just kept saying that I got a flat tire in my left leg. And what I ended up having was actually a hole in my psoas, which was pretty big. When I saw the doctor, he said he had never seen a hole that big in the psoas before. So what happened is I make it all the way to at the bottom of the hill going up to Champelac. I'm still feeling good, like everything's great. And I start going up, and then for some reason I start feeling like kind of like this electrical, like kind of like something's going like all through my left side, but it's starting in my hip. And as I'm lifting my foot like off the ground, like I'm starting to feel like sharp pain in my left hip. So then I'm thinking like, oh, this is not good. Like I don't know what this is, but this doesn't feel like I'm tired kind of pain. So I decided to walk the entirety of that hill going up to Champelac. When I get to Champelac, I sit down and I take like a 5-minute break. And my brother's there, and I tell him like, hey, can you make sure that you get me the physio at the next aid station? Because I want to talk to him. I don't really tell what's going on. I'm just like, because I didn't want to really make it a reality, but at the same time, I really needed to figure it out. I get going, and then I go up Champelac, and then there's like a downhill before you start going up again. And in that next downhill is where my body was just like, there's no way that you can be going downhill right now. And like, I started like losing kind of like, I was putting my foot on the ground and I couldn't really like, hold my body up. Like it was just hurting me.
Uncoordinated or something?
I was uncoordinated and I couldn't really, it was just so painful. And that's when it started being really, really bad. I made it to the top of that hill, and I don't know how I did it, because I was just like, I was using my poles. I was just like, kind of keep moving, but I knew something was off. And then, so Katie caught me at the very top of that hill, and then it was really funny. I do want to say what she told me. She told me that, I said, hey, I said, there you are. And then she said, yeah. I said, you're feeling better? She says, yes. And then she said, I had a sandwich. I heard you say that at Western States, that when you threw up, you had a sandwich and you felt better. And she said, it really helped me. And I was like, I said, cool. And then then we started going downhill, but like I could barely do it. And so I was just like, okay, well, go ahead. And she went down, and that was the last time I saw her. And that was honestly the end of my race. I was just like, okay, at this point, my only goal is to finish the race, and I'm going to make that my priority, but that's all I'm going to be able to do. So,
well, man, that makes me so happy to hear that you guys had that type of an exchange. The deepest part of a very competitive battle at the world's most important race is that the two leaders can crack jokes about eating sandwiches. Yeah. I think I recall an I Run Far Twitter update of Katie Scheid coming into Champagne Lock saying something to that effect, like, oh, I had a cheese sandwich and now I'm feeling better. And so she, of course, went on to achieve a fantastic victory, and you held on to the finish line in a fantastic second place performance, even though you were dealing with a hole in your psoas, as you described. Any highlights from those closing miles, aside from just sort of being a hobbled person in agony, that you think are worth mentioning?
Well, I just want to give a huge shout out to my crew and the team, the Solomon team. So the physio and the other members of the Solomon team, who were just like incredibly supportive of me. And it wasn't pretty. It was not pretty at all. And it must not have been fun. And I'm entirely, I made it to the finish line because of them, and I have them to thank for sure. Not only did I make it to the finish line because of them, but I held on to my second place because of them. And for that, I'm grateful. I definitely want to thank them for that.
Yeah. Incredible. How are you feeling physically now with the psoas issue and having put yourself through two of the hardest and most competitive 100-milers in a 2-month span? Like, are you taking some serious downtime now? Do you feel like you're legitimately injured, or are you more just like fatigued and need a little rest?
Well, the thing that's keeping me from doing anything right now is really my psoas. In the sense of, the doctor was very clear that I need to take at least 6 weeks off running. Okay. So there's no doubt that is that I will have to do. And but that being said, I do think that it's good for me. I think that given the circumstance, I have no choice, but I think that would have been the wiser choice regardless. I think that, beginner's luck. I can only count on beginner's luck one time, and now I have to start making smart decisions. And jokes aside, I do think that there is something to be said of relaxing, respecting your body, respecting your limits. And I knew that I was pushing my limits by doing my two first 100 miles in a 2 months period, and I was going to take some time off. It's just, I would have liked to be able to go for a jog in 2 or 3 weeks, but I guess I'll have to wait 6 weeks for that to happen. And I'm actually going to go back and do some work with my Paralympic team. So the Paralympic triathlon team. So it actually works out great. I'm going to start swimming more and biking more, and running. We'll just have to wait for a little bit.
Yeah. Well, I was just going to say, taking 6 weeks off is probably the wise thing to do, even if it weren't forced. So
yeah,
no doubt you'll get through that in the blink of an eye. In fact, when 6 weeks are over, you're probably gonna be like, I'm not sure I really want to start training again yet. So you mentioned Matthew Blanchard a little while ago, and you guys standing on the start line together. I wondered if you maybe wanted to share your reflections about you two, who are apparently good friends. I've heard from our mutual friend, Nico, or another great Montreal Canadian trail runner guy, that you and Matthew are good friends. So I wondered if you maybe wanted to share what the experience was like to both have such spectacular performances, finishing second place in the world's most important race together, and what your interactions have been like after the fact.
Yeah, so yeah, actually Matthew is one of my closest friends. I met him through the Solomon Running Ultra Running Academy in 2017. And we were the people selected to kind of keep going forward. And so we ended up running the Transalpine together, which is a stage race that you have to be paired. So you can't do a 7-day stage race with someone and not become, you either become best friends or you end up hating each other. And and in our case, we became best friends, and we've been best friends ever since, in the sense of, he's definitely someone that I look up to, someone who is incredibly generous with his knowledge and his time, in the sense of, like, we spend so much time running in the mountains together, and he never stopped, like, he's done UTMB twice before. And so in August, when we did it together, he took a lot of his time to tell me, like, hey, here you should be eating a lot, here you should be taking out your poles, like all of those little details that really do add up, and that mean a lot. But also, so I do think that that's one part of it, but I do think that the thing he did about me standing on the front line of UTMB, I think shows a lot about the person he is. He cares a lot about other people. And I think it's nice that he said something along the lines of, like, he thinks that the start line of UTMB is too macho like, and you need to bring more women to the front. And I appreciated him for saying that. So yeah, that's definitely on the side of, the impact he's had for my preparation for this race. But during the race, it was just amazing because I kept asking updates, like from the team. I was like, hey, how is Mathieu doing? Where is he? And at one point when I was leading, he was also leading, which was very, very fun I thought was very cool. And then it was funny that we both ended up second. But I do think that he delivered, obviously a historical performance.
One of the best 100-mile races of all time.
Yeah.
Incredible.
And mentally very, very challenging race, because if you're racing against Kilian, like, I can't, I can't even imagine how difficult that must be. Like, because he was going head to head with Kilian, and he wasn't letting go. Like,
it goes back to what I just said. There's two types of people in the world, right? Somebody who shrinks from that opportunity, and somebody who rises to that occasion, and he very much did so. Incredible.
Yeah, he rose to the occasion, and he was not letting go. He gave it his very best shot until the very end, and he who knew, like, he could have gotten it, and that's what's great about this sport, is that and that's what's great about Mathieu, is that he really put himself out there, and that's what you need to do. In ultra running, like, anything can happen, and you have to put yourself out there, because otherwise it's not going to happen to you. So I do think that he is a good example of that, and I'm so happy that he got second. And then we had a good laugh, because there were pictures being taken and sent to. So we're like two friends in a group of friends, and on the podium, the both of us are standing next to Kilian and Jim, and so it's like our group of friends are like, "What are you two doing? What are you two doing with Kilian and Jim?" It was really funny.
Oh, that's so great. And he, of course, now has a golden ticket to Western States. I'm going to try and get him on the podcast too. Maybe I'll ask for your help in achieving that. But
yeah, for sure.
I'm hoping he'll come down here to the US to race our quintessential North American 100-mile race too.
It's funny because I wanted him to come in 2022 because I was going, and I was so excited because that was my goal. Obviously, I wasn't qualified yet, but I had tried to get him out for 2022. But I'm trying for 2023. But I'm worried that this UTMB performance is gonna change his planning.
He's like, schedule. I'm so close.
Yeah. So we'll see.
Well, you both are. And there's time to check everything off the bucket list. So whether it's next year or off in the future, it'll be great to have Mathieu at Western States eventually.
Yeah, of course.
What about Katie? Did you guys, or Caitlin Gerben, or any of the other, women in the top 10, were there any fun interactions after the race that are memorable that you'd like to share?
Yeah, well, I chatted with Katie quite a bit. It's really nice because she's actually a really good friend of Kemi Brias, and
Yep.
I got to know Kemi a lot at Western State. So she had spoken to me about Kemi a lot. So it was really nice. I mean, after the race, we just got to chat a lot. But no, I mean, just it was nice to catch up and to get to know her, because during the race, obviously, we had like maybe a 4-minute total conversation, but that's it. So it was nice to kind of sit down and learn more about her. Obviously, she's from Maine, which is really not that far from where I live.
That's right.
So, yeah. It's just kind of nice, It's kind of weird that we find ourselves on the podium of UTMB. A girl from Maine and the girl from Montreal, and Caitlin. Obviously, I chatted with Caitlin. Actually, I had a funny interaction with Caitlin because what happened was at the end of the race, people were telling me that Caitlin was catching up to me. And so I had to accelerate. And so I told her that I was worried that she was catching on to me the same way that she was caught on, like, because I had watched her film, like The Last Mile. I don't know if you've seen it.
Yep.
And so we kept kidding around that I was going to beat Caitlin Gerbin by Caitlin Gerbin. And so we were discussing that after the race, and it was really funny.
Yeah, so cool. Well, congratulations on an amazing performance. And it's so cool to see you, the best women in the world being so supportive of one another and so like encouraging of one another, and the sportsmanship. And I think one of the coolest takeaways for me from this year is that 9 countries were represented in the women's top 10. In fact, I may have it up on my computer right here. So let me see if I do. Yeah. So it was the US, Canada, France, Hungary, Zimbabwe, China, Spain, Italy, and Germany, all represented in the women's top 10 at UTMB this year. Just so cool. And you and Katie put on a fantastic, showing of competitiveness and grit and sportsmanship that I think will live in history, as every UTMB does. So, Marianne, it's been so fun to hang out and get to know you a little bit. Maybe in closing, let's just talk about what you have coming up. I know obviously you're a little bit on the shelf right now, and you're probably I hope you're probably shutting it down for the season. You've kind of at least suggested that you don't have any other plans for the rest of this season. But looking further ahead, I mean, like I said, you're just coming into like your prime as an athlete, and you've clearly established yourself as one of the best in the world. How are you thinking about your future in the sport? What are you excited about, and what else do you hope to accomplish?
That's a good question, and the one that I really have to take some time to think about the things that I want to accomplish. But some things for sure that I do want to do, and it kind of just happened as a spur of the moment, in the sense of, when I got third at Western States, I immediately said that I wanted to go back. And at the same time, I also wanted a ticket for UTMB 2023. And so I was thinking like, oh, I said yes to that too. So, so right now the things that I do have, is actually Western States 2023 and UTMB 2023, which ever since I completed both and I put a hole in my psoas, I'm wondering if there's a connection there, and I should learn from my mistakes or anything like that, which I will take time to do, and I will take time to meet with the appropriate professionals, because I don't think that my personal opinion is enough. So I will take time to kind of evaluate that and question myself as to if it's a good idea. But now, just a few days removed from UTMB, I think that my heart would be crushed if I have to pick one or the other, because I very much enjoyed Western States and the family that's there and kind of the community of Western States. But then I went to UTMB and I kind of fell in love with the community out there too. So I don't know if I'll be able to pick one or the other. But I am kind of excited to go back and try to see if I can do better. So that's kind of what I have for now. Obviously, I'll probably have some preparation races or something, but that's kind of what I have lined up for the moment. And eventually, of course, I will want to go out and do some other stuff. There is so much to be. There's so many cool races to do, and I do really much enjoy the stage races. So I do think that would be a fun thing to accomplish. And there's a lot of other countries that I'd like to visit that I haven't done. I haven't visited. So I would like to start ticking off some ultras from all over the world, just to kind of make sure that I also make the most of my experiences. But yeah.
Well, yeah. I mean, it's a tough decision to make, to do Western States or UTMB, or to do both of them. But I know that you will be cognizant and grateful of the fact that it's a great problem to have, and that there's thousands of ultra runners around the world that would love to have the opportunity to run one of them. So, well, Marianne, congratulations on such an awesome year of racing. I'm sorry you're dealing with a little bit of an injury. It's not surprising after what you've accomplished in the last 12 months, but I think this is a great opportunity for you to just rest and enjoy everything that you've achieved. And I hope that, we'll have the opportunity to connect in person at Western States next year. And I appreciate you coming on the podcast.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, Dylan.